up David. She's going to give us an introduction, and then we will hear Mr. Tromper's story. So, grab it. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Trying to see if I can see some familiar faces out there. Thank you. I'm glad to be here with you today. Thank you to Thurston Middle School for inviting me. I'm Rabbi Karen Citron, Rabbi Temple David here in Westwood. Also want to offer my gratitude to Facing History and ourselves for bringing just wonderful people in to share their stories. As you probably are aware, these are hard times we are living in. Too often, the voices of hate rise to the surface. The teens, often 13-year-olds who become bar mitzvah at our synagogue, hear me say a lot that young people, like all of you, have a voice and can make a difference. I know you've learned about the pyramid of hate, and that hate starts with attitudes and words and actions, bullying, discrimination, and violence. Perhaps you've heard that anti-Semitism, hatred toward Jews, and Islamophobia, hatred toward Muslims, is significantly on the rise here in the United States since October 7th. At our synagogue in Westwood, we have increased our security. These are hard times, and we can make a difference. The Holocaust is personal for me and for most Jewish people. When I was growing up, I knew that there was something different about my great uncle, Uncle Harry. It wasn't just his thick Polish accent that was hard for me to understand. He was different mainly because he never spoke about his past, not in the way that my other relatives did. My uncle had survived the Lodz ghetto and several concentration camps, including Auschwitz. The numbers tattooed on his arm are forever engraved in my mind, 141421. My uncle did not start sharing his story until I was in high school. At that point, Holocaust survivors were aging, and there was a push to hear and record their stories. In addition to 6 million Jews who were murdered, millions of other people who the Nazis deemed less than human were killed. LGBTQ people, Black people, political prisoners, and people with disabilities. This is why we are here today, to learn from these personal stories and make sure that this never happens again. There is a Jewish saying that is 2,000 years old: in a place where there are no humans, strive to be human. In other words, when the people aren't behaving in a humane way, treat others with respect and dignity. Raise your voice. Thank you for sharing your story today.
You want to introduce? Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Thank you for inviting me here. My name is Isaac Jack Trompetter. I ask that you think of my story as I tell it to you as your story, your family's story, and get inside of it to try and comprehend it. I was born August 2nd, 1942, a very long time ago, in Amsterdam, Holland. My country had been occupied for about 2 years by the Germans, by the Nazis. As soon as the Germans entered Holland, they did what they did in every country. They began the process of separating out the Jewish people from the rest of the community. Holland then was a country of 9 million people with about 140,000 Jews, not a lot of Jews. If you were a teacher, a doctor, a nurse, a jurist, a policeman, a fireman, a politician, you were fired. You were no longer in a job. They wanted to have Jewish people have no contact with non-Jewish people. It also meant that there were signs in the park not for Jews. There were signs at the swimming pools, not for Jews. It was a way to separate people so then later you can get rid of them. My parents were working class people. My father was in the restaurant business. My mother was a dressmaker. I was born during the occupation, which meant that there were rules about when Jewish people could go out and go shopping. There were curfews, and of course the curfews were never to the advantage of Jewish people, ordinary working class people. I was lucky because this microphone keeps going off and on. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, hallelujah. I was lucky. My father was arrested. The Germans would come into the Jewish neighborhood, and Amsterdam is a city of something like 600 islands. The Germans would raise the bridges so no one could flee. They'd come into the neighborhood, they'd sweep all the Jewish men, put them in trucks. My father gets caught up in such a raid, it's called a razzia. He's taken with a few hundred other Jewish men to a local gymnasium and a school. They're all told to lay on their bellies, lay flat on the ground, and they're periodically beaten in the backs with long batons by the Germans and those Dutch police who were collaborators. It's time for me to be born. My mother has no idea where my father is. There is a curfew, so getting to the hospital is problematic. My mother's father of blessed memory decides, to hell with the curfew. This is my daughter. This is my grandchild. I'm going with her to the hospital. They get to the hospital, and what they observe is German soldiers running in and out of wards, hauling people out of the hospital. They didn't hit the maternity ward yet. I'm born between 2 and 4 in the morning. Now, you're young people. Imagine your first child. How exciting, how mysterious, how wonderful. At the same time, absolute terror. The thing to keep in mind as I tell you this story about everything that goes on, the background, the wallpaper to the story is everyone is in a state of heightened fear. Certainly the Jewish people. They didn't know whether they'd be alive the next day. It was fear 28 hours a day. So there I am born. My mother's delighted, thrilled, and also, where is my husband? Where is the father of this child? Not knowing he was busted. He's with the other Jewish men for about a week. The moment comes when they're told by the Germans to all stand up in a row because the Germans wanted to see who had a contagious disease. The Germans were deathly afraid of contagious diseases, mostly tuberculosis at that time. The moment at which they get in front of my father, asking him in German, "Haben Sie eine Krankheit?" Do you have an illness? Another German officer is yelling, "Mach schnell, hurry up, hurry up." Someone says, yes. It is misunderstood that indeed this man, my father, has a contagious disease. So the scientific way in which the Germans deal with this contagious disease possibility, they grab him by the scruff of his collar and throw him out on the street. German science. He gets to a telephone, and back then there were no such thing as cell phones, and phones weren't that common either. He gets to a telephone, calls the restaurant he works in. They come with a bicycle with a big box. They plop him in the box. They take him to the restaurant. He eventually comes home. And he too, like my mother, sees me, his first child, for the first time. He is thrilled, happy, and terrified, thinking to himself, what the hell now? What do I do now? He understood by the way he was treated by the Germans, not being a criminal, not having jaywalked, not having done anything terrible, but because he was a Jewish man, he was arrested and treated brutally. The Germans had convinced themselves and many other people that Jewish people were not quite human. It was like being a slave in America. You were 2/3 of a human being. And if you were a Jew, you didn't even reach that 2/3. And you could treat Jews brutally. You were a Jewish person in Holland, you walked down the street, you had to have a Jewish star on your coat in the front and the back, which meant that any racist anti-Semite came up to you and whack you upside the head and hurt you and do anything they wanted, and the police would do nothing. If you were Jewish, you had no recourse to the law, to someone helping you, an official person helping you. That didn't happen anymore. My father understands that the brutality, things were not going to get better. What to do then? And Jews were considered illegal immigrants. There were places they couldn't leave, and there were places they couldn't get in because they were Jewish. He thinks to himself, what am I going to do? We'll go into hiding. We'll go underground. Now imagine today, let's say there's an orange-haired demon that becomes the leader of the country, and he doesn't like your group. What do? Do you go to Brooklyn, the Caribbean, Canada, Europe? Where do you hide? This is the kind of problem my parents and many, many people had to deal with. Ordinary people who didn't have the advantage of having seen many movies or many TV shows, all these plots about what to do. They had to figure out from their own head, their own creativity, their own heart, what to do. My parents, I was lucky, my parents decided we were going to go into hiding. Now, what does that mean, going into hiding? Where do you go? Who do you trust? Who do you tell? My parents had large families like many people did then. You couldn't tell your parents, you couldn't tell your siblings, because if people were arrested, information was dangerous to know. So you couldn't talk that much about it. It's planned. My father was a man who was politically aware and active. He gets in touch with people who get in touch with people who get in touch with people who are part of the resistance. And in the resistance, you had people doing many different things. One of the things is what high school and college students, people like yourselves, did. They found hiding places for Jewish children, which meant that a whole family could not go into hiding. And the reason for that was if you were arrested, the chance of you surviving because your family was split up would be greater. So there I am, 3 months old at this point. My mother and father with their new child, my mother being told, yes, there's a chance your kid might survive, but you have to give up the kid to complete strangers. Imagine being that mother. Imagine the work, the emotional work that takes to get to the point where you could say, yes, let's do that. I've always considered my mother a heroic person because of this. So, the day comes when my parents go into their hiding journey. I am sent to my aunt, Tante Ali, who is a Gentile woman, and I stay with her for a few weeks. My parents begin the journey of their going into hiding. They're going eventually to a town called Tilburg in the south of Holland. The way the resistance groups also decided how children go where they go, Holland was occupied by Spain for a while in the 14th, 15th century, and it meant that there were many Dutch people who were a little darker, and we're talking about white people here, who were darker than the average Dutch person who was tall, fair-haired, light-skinned, and south of Holland was Catholic. The north of Holland was Protestant, and this wasn't just a difference about ritual worship, it was a cultural difference. So Jewish children who, like myself, were a bit darker, were ostensibly were supposed to go to the south of Holland to blend in and fit in. Children like my cousin Andy, who was red-haired and freckled, was supposed to be in the north of Holland. These are the kind of things people had to think about, the kind of decisions they had to make. I find it remarkable. My parents spent a night in Rotterdam. I want to jump back for a moment. My mother told me the evening when they went to the train station in Amsterdam, she was in a rage because she was made to feel like a criminal skulking at night. Of course, they took the Stars of David off their coats. My mother was a seamstress, so she knew enough to know to make sure there was no stitching that looked like there had been a Jewish star, a Star of David. They get to the train and she's sitting there holding on to her rage. Ordinary Dutch people smoking, having their coffee, German soldiers, ordinary people not having to face what people on the run had to face. My parents get to Rotterdam, they spend the night there. The next day they go on to Tilburg, which is this small community in the south of Holland, close to the Belgian border. They're told to look for a tall man with a bicycle with a flat tire. And the reason for the flat tire is so he could carefully walk with the bike. If he was on the bike biking, my parents had to follow with their suitcase. Doesn't look so good. So they're following him. His name is Jan van Dumburg of blessed memory. He was a man who was 26 years old. He was an ex-soldier in the Dutch cavalry, and he hated the fact that the Germans had invaded his country. He was a conservative, not so much of a religious man, but a very conservative Dutchman. And his wife, Corrie van Dumburg of blessed memory, was a 22-year-old homemaker. And they followed him to the house. As my mother said, they get to the house, they meet Corrie van Dumburg. There's a table laden with food and drink to welcome them. And my mother thinks to herself, oh, you poor young people, what have you taken upon yourselves? When people went into hiding, they had no idea how long this would be. Some people thought maybe a few weeks, the war might be over. Who knows, the Germans might defeat England, the war will be over, and we'll be okay. Most people then had no idea that there was such a thing as death camps. Camps that were particularly and especially built to destroy people. Not camps as a factory to make things, but as a factory to destroy people. People had no idea. You could not imagine this. We now know of it because it happened, but to try and imagine it is very hard. So they felt, the war will be over a few weeks, a few months, who knows. My parents were in hiding for 2.5 years. I was in hiding for 3 years. People had no idea. My parents come from a cosmopolitan Amsterdam culture. The language they speak is almost different than the language that Corrie and Jan spoke in the south of Holland. Corrie and Jan are in their 20s. My mother's 31, my father's 30. They try and get along with each other. They have a sender, which is what a radio was called. It was illegal to have a radio back then. If you were caught having a radio, you were sent to prison or a concentration camp. And they listened to the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, which told them about the course of the war. It told them the truth about how the war was going. And they would have English lessons. My parents would try and learn some English. They'd have dancing lessons. They would dance. And they tried to make a life together, not knowing how long they would be together. And of course, all the time, my mother is worried about Jackie, me, in Dutch, Shekkie. I'm still diminutive at this point. And she's kind of driving people crazy with this concern with me. Cora van Dumburg takes it upon herself. She's going to find out how I'm doing so she can report back to my mother the kid is okay or whatever. So she goes to Amsterdam to my Aunt Ollie, and she is able to tell my Aunt Ollie something confidential, so my aunt trusts her. My aunt tells Cora where I am. I'm in a Quaker orphanage, one of a number of places I was sent to, and no doubt there were other Jewish children in the orphanage. And I was 3.5 months old. All I knew was that people could talk sweetly to me. They held me well. They held me lovingly. They fed me. That's all I knew. I didn't know there was a war going on. I didn't know that I was a Jewish child on the way to hiding. Cora finds me in the Quaker orphanage. She observes across the street are German barracks, and by this time, the British had already started bombing the countryside. She felt it was dangerous for me. I wasn't safe. I don't know how she did it. She takes me out of the orphanage. She spends the night in the woods with me because there was no public transportation. She had to wait till the next morning for a train to come. She gets on the train with me. We didn't look alike. We didn't look like mother and child. And she, a 22-year-old woman, was able to figure out, how can I act like I'm the mother of this kid when I'm sitting on the train? What do I do? And she was able to figure that out. She's on the train with me, and evidently I was not a cranky, I was a quiet kid, a little black-haired, hairy little kid. And at some point, a Dutch woman goes over like this, "Oh, that's a cute baby. Is that a Jewish baby?" And Cora looks and goes, "How dare you?" Shuts the woman up, continues the train ride, takes me back to Amsterdam, but has the good sense to go to a photo booth and take a picture of me and her. She brings me back to my Aunt Ollie. Cora goes with the photo back to Tilburg, shows my mother the photo. Hallelujah, the kid is safe. My mother prayed to that photo every day in the 2.5 years she was in hiding. She also had a lock of my hair that she cut, prayed to that as well. And of course, knowing that story makes it difficult for me to be an atheist every day of the week, but some days. Later on in the 1960s, when it was the cultural law that men had to have long hair and ponytails and beards and earrings and bell-bottom pants, this was the law. I did that, of course, because I'm law-abiding. And at some point, all the mothers of the world, of course, said, you look like a bum. No one will love you. You'll never get a job. Cut your hair. Look like a nice person. So after being sick of hearing this all the time, I cut my hair, big ponytail. I sent it to my mother in a plain bag, and she gets it, and everything from the war rushes over her. And I learned this, of course, from her in her angry phone call. Had I known more details back then, I never would have done that. That's an aside. So, Cora takes me back to my Aunt Ollie. I continue my journey. I end up with the De Groot family of blessed memory. These were very poor, very religious farmers in a town called Heino, Heino, that was about 12 kilometers from the German border in the center of Holland. And I grow up for the next almost 3 years on a farm with this family. The sounds, the smells, the sights of the farm must have pleased me greatly. I grew up thinking this was my life. I had no experience that I could compare it to. This is my family. Throughout the war years, we lived together. Food is always a problem. With my parents in Corignan, food was not a problem because my mother was a seamstress and taught Cora to sew. And what they did back then was, let's say in September, school starts and your parents want to buy you some new clothing. They go maybe to the clothing market or fabric store, buy a bolt and make you something, you've got new clothing. Back then, none of that. The Germans had looted everything. People repaired their clothing. So if you were a seamstress, you could teach people how to repair, or you would, in exchange for food, repair their clothing, which is what my family did. So they always had enough food during the war years, which made it very difficult for my mother after the war, because when they found me, I was a skinny little kid, and she always felt guilty. And mothers do that. They had the guilt gland. And she felt guilty that they had food and I didn't. I'm with the De Groot family. I'm living a life that's okay. They treat me very well. There's food every night before dinner. I sit on someone's lap and they read the Bible every night, being grateful for the good things. And my parents are continuing their life elsewhere. At some point, they have no idea where I am and whether I'm alive or not. And they continue with that life. They're also people who understand that they had to say goodbye to their parents, people who were in their 60s, and their own sisters and brothers. Now imagine that if you're in such a dangerous situation and you were not able to help your parents. That was a hard thing to swallow, and that had to happen for many, many, many people. So they are grateful that they're in a safe environment, but any day they could be busted. That's to keep in mind. There was always the background of fear, but they're grateful they're safe, and they pray and pray that the child is okay. My parents and Corignan were in the south of Holland, which was liberated in 1944. The war is over for them. My father gets it in his head. He's going to get himself a weapon, a handgun, and go with the Canadian Army into Germany and wreak revenge. My mother was luckily smarter than he was and said, don't be stupid, that's not a good idea. He gets a job with the British Army, the Canadian Army, becomes a cook. Finally, the war is over. My parents have no idea who of their siblings are still alive. They know their parents have been murdered. Millions of people were murdered. They didn't just die, they were murdered. My father decides to find out who else in the family is still alive. He has no idea. he, like the film Charlie Chaplin, he gets a stick with a bag at the end over his shoulder, and he travels up and down Holland. Holland is a small country. It's a bit bigger than, let's say, Connecticut, but it's a small country. To think of someone hitchhiking up and down the country looking for someone is not so impossible. If you have a car and start at the German border and go 65 kilometers an hour, in about 2 hours you'll find yourself in the English Channel. It's that small a country. So he goes up and down Holland, he goes to a mayor's office, he goes to a commandant's office, he goes to a religious, he goes to a church. He says, are there any stories of Jewish children in hiding who are now surfacing that the war is over? No. Finally gets to a town called Raalte, R-A-A-L-T-E. What's nice about the Dutch language is you can roll your R's, Raalte. I found it very impressive. And they say, yes, indeed, the farm over there were some Jewish children who were in hiding, and they've come out. My father goes to the farm, bangs on the door. Hello, my name is Gerrit Trompetter. I'm looking for a boy that looks like blah, blah, blah. And he's giving a description, of course, of a 3-month-old kid, me. And the farmers, Mr. and Mrs. de Groot, say, yes, go sleep in the barn tomorrow morning. You come in the house. Tomorrow morning he comes in the house. He sees me for the first time after 3 years. He told me, he recognized me right away. I chose to believe him. I sit on his lap, we start talking. We can't understand each other. My Dutch is rural Dutch. It's like someone from the Northeast Kingdom in Vermont coming down to Coney Island and having a conversation. I say, pijn in my buik, pain in my stomach, meaning I'm hungry, buddy, got any food? He hears buik, he thinks it's the word boek for book. Oh, I'd like a book to read. No. And we sit and chat like that, but he's smart enough to know he can't just take me out of there as his son, because I've been with these other people for 3 years. He leaves me there, he goes back to Tilburg, says to my mother, hooray, hooray, I found the princeling, let's go get him. A week or so later, they come back to get me, but of course the de Groot family don't want to give me up. There they are with a child they've raised for 3 years, who they've learned to love and be pleased with my presence. And here come these vibrating, strange people who come from some horror story claiming this is their kid. What a situation. There are no social workers, there are no government bodies, there's no one there at that time in the history of Holland after the war to help people through that process. This was a phenom that had not happened before. What do you do? How do you do it? The government goes to the resistance organizations thinking it's doing the right thing. What do? Do we insist that the kid goes back or what? And the resistance groups all say, give the kid back to the parents. The Jewish children must go back with their Jewish families. Now that sounds good, but I have cousins whose parents were concentration camp survivors, and they were broken, destroyed people. And those cousins of mine would have been better off with their foster families, but to talk like that then was considered a heresy. I'm lucky. My story of the war and my parents' story of the war was a story that ended well. It wasn't a horror story about surviving a concentration camp. I'm lucky. My parents are lucky. They've lost a lot of family, there's a lot of grief, but they have their child, which makes a difference. So they're able to convince relatives of the de Groot family, it's a good thing to give me back to my family. The de Groot family does, with the proviso that we stay in touch with each other. The moment comes at which the de Groot family wants me to be baptized. Jewish people don't do a lot of baptism. And my parents took that as an opportunity to cut relations with the de Groot family, which was way too bad. I'm very sorry they did that, because I also kind of feel, yeah, baptize me. Insurance is a good thing, what the hell? But it turned out during the war, a lot of Jews were baptized and they were killed anyway, because you had to go back far in your family tree to not be Jewish to survive. The war is over, I'm reunited with my parents, and 3 months after I'm reunited, I'm in the hospital with a nervous breakdown. Now imagine being 3.5 plus a few months and having a nervous breakdown. This was my story. I remember it was a Catholic hospital. The nuns back then had the big gear on their heads, and they were very sweet and very kind to me, and it was a good memory. I'm back with my family. We had a relative in the United States, Tante Rose, Aunt Rose. She was a great American success story. She came to Holland after the war, took a look around, saw what needed to be done, gave my family some money and some help, and said, listen, come to America. Everything will be good there. I'll help you, she says to my father. Open up a restaurant. It'll be wonderful. Okay. My parents from 1945 to 1949 work, they save money, and they're sponsored. You must understand that while we talk about this country as being a generous country, back then you couldn't come here unless you had a sponsor, which meant an American citizen family that would promise to take care of you in case you couldn't find work, in case, God forbid, you went on public assistance. We were lucky people. We had an American family. I remember coming here, and it was the Holland American line. I was with my cousin Andy, who I thought was my brother at the time, on the boat, and we discovered 3 wonderful things on the journey over. Wonderful things. They had a thing called a swimming pool. They had a thing called an elevator, and they had a thing called a library. And the elevator was very cool because you go press a button, and then you run upstairs, and you press a button again, and the elevator goes like that, and people can't get in. Enormous fun. We get to Hoboken, New Jersey, which was the home port for the Holland American line. There's my Aunt Rose at the end of the gangplank. She calls me over, Jackie, say blah, blah, blah to that man over there, the policeman. I go down the gangplank, hello, policeman, blah, blah, blah. I have no idea what I said. I didn't know English. Welcome to America. So we begin our journey in America. We meet our American relatives, but our American relatives don't want to hear the story of what happened in the war. No. You work hard, it'll be wonderful. That was just a terrible nightmare, forget about it. So a lot of Holocaust survivor families didn't talk about their experience. No one wanted to hear it. It took many, many decades, 5 to 6 decades, before even the Jewish community was able to hear the story of what happened. I was lucky. My parents were people who were politically aware. They were active in the labor movement, and they knew something about history. And when my brother and I asked my mom and dad questions, we would get the answers. We learned what happened. When I was about 10 years old, my parents called my brother and I in and say, Andy, my brother, Jackie, listen, you're not brothers, you're cousins. Andy's mother was my father's sister. And we learned about this whole family that had perished. And I remember that night going to bed and crying and weeping. Oh, my poor brother Andy lost his mommy and daddy. Oh. And it took me 50 years to understand. I was crying for myself, for my own story. And it taught me that trauma takes a long time to address, takes a long time to feel safe and comfortable, to find the language to not only begin talking to yourself, but talking to other people about it. And it wasn't until 1991 that 5 women psychiatrists, Hidden Children, organized a conference in New York City for hidden children. For other Holocaust survivors, there was already public activity for concentration camp survivors, for more elderly people, but hidden children were kind of unknown. And they organized a conference expecting maybe 300 people. Over 1,600 people showed up. And it began the process of this community of people talking about their experience. I remember being in an elevator then in the hotel, and everyone had a name tag. Isaac Jack Trompetter, Holland. In comes this shorter, older woman, so-and-so, Holland. She looks up at me and she goes, so how old are you? I said, well, I was 3 months when I went into hiding. Ah, you're a baby. What did you know? And that was pretty much the attitude of the Holocaust community, never mind other people who didn't know anything about this. So we knew we were right to come together and talk about our experience. And in the Boston area, we've been meeting every Sunday since that year. And with the COVID, the last 4.5 years, we've been Zooming every Sunday. And in the beginning, it was Holocaust survivor people talking about their experience. Now it's pretty much old people talking about how good it is to know where the bed is, where the bathroom is, where the refrigerator is. But stuff comes up because as hidden children, as Holocaust survivors, we are like a community of canaries in the miner's helmet. And when racism and fascism become so apparent and so many people find it appealing, we are vibrating and we are nervous. And we can tell you, this is not good. And this is what's happening now. So I grew up in New York City. I was an artist even as a kid. I was lucky. I was a kid whose parents didn't say, no, don't do art. Don't do art, you'll never make a living. They said, yeah, you do art, but you have to learn a trade. I went to an art high school. I learned commercial art. I did commercial artwork for many years. I left New York City in 1972, moved to Vermont, lived up and down New England. I lived in Cambridge since 1982, was married to a wonderful person who had a daughter who is now my daughter, and am active, minimally politically, do a lot of speaking for Facing History, and consider this a very portentous time in the history of this country. And I hope to do my part in helping people understand what happened to me and my family happened in the past, but the past repeats itself. I have many other things I can say, but I found in talking that questions are the best part of the communication. So I'll stop now. If you have any questions, I'm not shy. Ask me anything you want. Thank you. Don't be shy. Can you stand up and yell so we can all hear you?
Yeah. How did you keep faith when it was the harder?
How do I keep faith?
Yeah, like how did you keep faith?
Well,
Repeat the question.
yes. How did I keep faith when it was the hardest? All of this happened to me when I was a child, when I had the attention and knowledge of a child. When I became an adult, I understood that I am who I am because of what happened to me so early on. And I think it's like that for most people. And I feel I have a responsibility, and I don't feel the word responsibility as a burdensome thing. I feel it as an honor and a privilege that I tell my story. Not that it's my story, but it's what happened to hundreds of thousands of people. And faith is, I think I'm fundamentally an optimistic person. I play the lottery because you never know. And I feel it's my responsibility to share this with you and hope that hope is a real thing. Obama, hope. Faith, I was, for a while, I was a religious person. I went to my local synagogue for many years. The rabbi there himself was a Polish Holocaust survivor, and I took it upon myself to be his go-to guy. I brought him to the synagogue every Shabbos, every Saturday, every Sunday, every Monday, every Thursday, and became his friend, and felt this was a powerful and wonderful thing to me, to be of service. And that was my faith. It was in actually physically helping someone else. I love religions, I love the stories, and to me they're all stories, and the reality is what we do in the world every 24 hours. Did that answer your question? Okay. Can you stand up and yell? This is the chance to yell.
What did it feel like to be the person who had the identity that everyone was against?
What did it feel like to be the person who had an identity and everyone was against? Well, the United States of America is a country that unless you're Native American or African American, you come from somewhere else. We all come from somewhere else. And those stories are not easy stories. You would do well, all of you, to talk to your grandparents while they're still in the world and find out what those stories are. And everyone who's here came from a place where they were that person, someone who wasn't liked, or felt they were someone who wasn't liked, or came here and wasn't liked for a long time too. So what does it feel like for me? I think I've always grown up and living in a life of opposition, culturally and politically. So I'm very comfortable with this moment in history. It's when Trump first won, Dave Chappelle was asked, so what do you think of that? And he said, hey, for me and my people, this is how it's always been. And that tells me a lot. Did that answer your question? Speak up and yell.
How did your Holocaust experience change how you live your life?
How did my Holocaust experience affect how I live my life now? Well, I didn't have anything to compare it to, so I'm not sure, but I feel I'm better off being a person who is politically aware and has some knowledge of history, so I can understand the moment I'm in now and not be so frightened that I can't act. And yes, the Holocaust has completely affected who I am. Did that answer your question? You young man.
Yeah, can you tease that out a little when you say the Holocaust has affected you? What are some of the ways, besides the political ones you talked about in awareness, in what other ways has it shaped you?
Well, I remember when I first came here and I first heard the N-word, and I heard it from a Holocaust survivor, an old woman from Czechoslovakia. And I felt very uncomfortable. I wasn't sure how to think about why I felt uncomfortable, but I found it scary, actually. And I found it was much too similar to the way people said Jew or Żydowska or Yid or any terrible way to say someone is Jewish. I felt there's something wrong in here, and it made me aware of that. And it made me aware of paying attention to racism in America. The great writer, James Baldwin, was asked about the history of America, and he said the history of Africa America is the history of America. And I was able to understand my own oppression as a European Jew in that context in America, and it gave me clarity with that. Did that answer your question?
I also was just thinking, do you think in what way, I mean, that affected you in terms of how you see some things for yourself politically, but in terms of how might have it affected you on another personal ways?
Well, I was married to a woman who had a mixed child. She's now a woman who's a news broadcaster in LA, and her father was very active politically in what was then called the civil rights struggle, and I was too, and her mother was too, and she's heard me speak and has given me good advice on things to refer to. So it's been part of my personal life and has opened that up for me.
If you could change one thing that happened in your
life in the Holocaust or just in general, what would it be?
If I could change one thing in my life in the Holocaust, what would it be? Wow, how much time do you have? That was a joke. Well, that's a great question, and I don't have a quick answer, and I will think on that question. It's a great question. Yeah, and you had something too.
How old were you when you were able to understand what was going on during this time?
How old was I when I was able to understand? Well, I hope that's still to come. I'm 82 now for the first time. It's very bizarre being an elderly person like that. Very strange, but it's given me a great deal of freedom and latitude. While on one hand I'm invisible when I walk down the street, on the other hand I can say anything I want and people will attribute it to Tourette's and I won't be in trouble. I think, I'm afraid understanding, Sophocles said understanding comes with suffering, and I'm afraid he was right. Understanding comes with suffering and it comes with age, but you gotta wanna. You gotta, at some point in your life, decide, I want to understand what's going on. I want to understand my life. I want to understand where I come from. We all talk about, we talk about choice. We're born without any of the important choices. We have nothing to say about who our parents are. We have nothing to say about our DNA. We have nothing to say about how the world is when we are born, and no choice at all. So the minute we are born is when we start that. And for me, a definition of democracy is it's about choices, making choices. I feel like it's a bit of a rant that I just did. Did that answer your question? Understanding comes with time, but you gotta decide to do it. It doesn't fall in your lap. Didn't fall in my lap.
How did you pass time during
Can you yell?
How did you pass time during your hiding?
How did I pass time during my hiding? I was busy being a little kid, thinking everything was all right. What? There's a war on? I don't know what that means. The Dakota family held me. They must have kissed me at some point, touched me gently, fed me. I was on a farm when I left New York in 1972. At some point, for 7 years, I owned a farm with someone else. We had a milk cow, we had chickens, we had hogs. We did the whole thing. I loved it, loved it. I didn't feel any dissonance from coming from urban New York to living on a farm and working a farm. And I attribute that to my first years on the farm. Yeah, how I passed my time growing up, trying to become 4 years old.
Did you have any friends when you were hiding?
Did I what?
Did you have any friends when you were hiding?
Did I have any friends when I was hiding? I don't remember. I know there were animals on the farm, so I must have talked to, the chickens and I were like this. I didn't have any friends until after the war. I remember friends in my neighborhood. In Holland, everyone's on a bicycle as soon as they can. We bike. I always had friends as an adult person or a teenager where I lived. I'm not hard to get along with. Can you yell? How did people treat me after the Holocaust? Well, the Holocaust was not something that figured prominently in how people made decisions, at least in this country, about other people. It wasn't, again, until the 1990s, and also with attention to the state of Israel, the matter of Jewish and Holocaust became a thing. And I am not a simplistic person. I think all these matters of identity are complex, and they're always on the move. Did that answer the question at all?
How normal did life feel in hiding, like when you look back on the situation?
Say that louder, please.
How feel in life, like when you look back, knowing the situation you were in, how normal did it feel as opposed to like
Now,
now?
how normal did it feel, the Holocaust experience? Well, again, I have to say, I was a child, and I consider myself one of the luckiest people I know. I was comforted and buffeted by the love of people, and I am only alive because there are people who are upstanders, who took a risk so that I could come to this moment and speak with you. The Holocaust identity I take very seriously now because I think I can do some good by speaking. So I hope I can speak as long as I can. The matter of feeling the quality of life during and after, I can't say much about during because I was a child, but afterwards I can say I've had a good life. I've been lucky because my parents were wonderful people. They suffered tremendously, and they were supreme jugglers. They didn't say to my brother and I in the important parent-child conversations, oh, listen, human beings are scumbags and life sucks and it's terrible. Look what they do to each other. They didn't say that at all. They could have said that and been right. They said all the right things to give my brother and I hope and strength and be compassionate people. So I consider them the superb teachers, given what they went through. They could have easily been other kinds of people.
Is your time of the Holocaust make you more grateful in today's day today?
Well, did my time as a Holocaust kid make me more grateful about now? Yeah. I often think about, what if I had a different history? What if, in fact, I had stayed in Holland and went into my father's business, the restaurant business? What would life have been like? But of course, those are what ifs. I am very grateful for my life right now, and I'm very grateful for being okay enough as an 82-year-old man to speak before all of you, and that you give me this opportunity. I appreciate very much. Thank you all.
Jack, there's another question.
Oh,
Did you know that family wasn't your parents?
yell like it's someone you want to really.
Did you know that the whole family weren't your parents and
Were what with my parents?
were not?
Oh. Did I know that the Koch family were not my parents when I was in hiding? No, I didn't know that. You know, they were the people that I saw every day. They were the people that gave me food. They were the people that put me to sleep. They were the people that read their Bible to me. Sounds pretty nice for someone who's between 3 months and 3 years. Sounds pretty good. I'm very sorry that I was not able to have a relationship as an older kid with the Dechow family. In 1952, my brother, cousin Andy, was also in hiding and survived. His foster mother, Mrs. De Vries, of blessed memory, came to visit us in the United States to see Andy. And at some point she said she's going to Oregon. And what is Oregon? She had family in Oregon. She went to Oregon. She came back to us, and then she went back to Europe, and some years later she passed away. About 20 years ago, I get a phone call from the Young Christian Fellowship of Portland, Oregon. Would I help them get a designation as a righteous Gentile for Mrs. De Vries? Righteous Gentile means that if you are a Gentile person during the war and you did something significantly helping Jewish people survive, and you survived, you were given that designation as a badge of honor. Trees would be planted in Israel, you would get a bronze medallion, and it would be indeed an honor. And I could not do it for my foster family, but I helped them do it for my brother's foster family. And indeed, she got that designation, so I feel good about that. You know, having this history is filled with so many what-ifs. And I'm only sorry that I didn't learn as much as I learned about the war until a certain age. My brother and I moved, as soon as we turned 21, we were out of the house. And my mother was very angry because the European tradition is you stay in the house till you get married, whether you're male or female. And my mother said, oh, I know why you guys are going out. It's the girls, isn't it? I said, no, no, no. And of course she was right. We got our own apartment. And on the weekends we would come home because my mother was still the better cook. And we were the kind of family that after dinner, Andy and I would ask my parents questions and they would answer. And we learned a lot about what happened to us from those conversations. And at some point we got my mother a tape recorder, and I don't know if you all know, but back then tape recorders were the size of this room with 10,000 buttons on each side. And my mother thought, this is not going to work. She spent 13 years writing down the whole family history, so she is our family scribe, and she had a good memory, and she could write. So much of what I learned, again, was a gift of life from my mother and father.
Did you ever have the desire to try to find that family, or did you ever try to do that?
I did. I never had the desire to try and find them. I did. My parents moved out to Holland in 1972, and right after I left New York. So again, this recapitulation of history was moving around. And I would visit my parents once a year. And one year came where they were still alive. I said, I want to find the Dakota farm. And they weren't too enthusiastic. And I said, listen, I'm going to go tomorrow whether you're going to go or not. I'll take the train, the bus, I'll walk, whatever. And indeed, they had their late night conversation. The next one said, we'll go with you, which was good because they had the car. So we go, we get to Ralta, we go to the city hall, we talk to them, and they tell us, oh, we have no idea. That whole area is all new highway. And indeed, all the farmlands there had gone through the same changes as we did here. All big highways, no farm, no one knew from anything. Again, the problem of not dealing with it sooner. And you know, the Jewish community in America, Jewish survivor families, Europe, people were not that interested in looking at the history of that period. No one looked good. And it took for people of my history, my generation, to become adults and ask the right questions. And then there became responses. As well, we thought, us survivors thought, that when the last of us dies of old age, there won't be any more interest in the Holocaust as some area of scholastic research and activity. Indeed, the opposite has happened. It's become a very important part for research. Many colleges now have courses on it. So I feel that it's important for me to speak, to bring that personal narrative to the public. Did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Jack?
Wait, I got one here.
Did the Holocaust make
Loud, really loud.
Did the Holocaust make you view yourself differently?
Did the Holocaust what?
Made you view yourself differently?
Say it again, please.
Made you view yourself differently?
Oh, well, did the Holocaust make me view myself differently? Well, I view myself, among other things, as a Holocaust survivor because I feel I have a responsibility to tell the story. Otherwise, I'm not that interested in talking about my life. I'm an artist. That's important to me. I've tried to do everything I could to have time to make art. And the Holocaust is a significant part of my identity. And the time will come where there will not be any more Holocaust survivors to talk. So get me while I'm precious. There's somebody here?
I think this will be our last question.
Okay.
What was your most memorable event while you were in hiding?
What was my most memorable event when I was in hiding? Actually, that's a great question, and I'm sorry to say I do not remember that. All I remember is significantly a very safe time. And this is probably a lot of imprinting my consciousness on that period, because I know I have friends who at that age were in concentration camps who survived, and those are horror stories. I did not have a horror story. I'm speaking to you as a survivor And I do not have that horror story. Thank you all.
All right, can we just get one more round of applause? Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming. Everyone was fantastic. Students, those were some great questions. We're really thankful for everyone who helped make this possible today. We do have a little thank you card and thank you gift from all of us here at Thurston Middle School.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is this the yearbook?
It's a cutting board with the Westwood logo.
Geez.
Nice cutting board. So I think we're going to dismiss back to advisories. Okay. Do we want to start with this half of the room and then so we're going to go back to advisories for our reflection